Let's face it, after the shock wears off of what happened, there is a sense of outrage left behind by the Parade Day shooting, that kids were hurt, that a woman died, and that this keeps happening. That anger is fueling a push for change.
I want Kansas City to be the light and change in this country.
We've seen public meetings now set up on the county level, filled with people weighing in on how to curb gun violence. Jackson County legislator Manny Abarca hosted a special listening session last week. Remember, he had to hide inside Union Station with his young daughter the day of the shooting.
I would love to see us pass background checks, permit processes, insurance requirements, these types of things. And I know we're going to get sued, but I think that's the point. Let's do it. Let's drive this issue forward and get stuff done. And if we can't pass it, let's fight it in the courts.
Abarca plans to host these sessions until policy change actually happens. What will that mean? Well, you heard him mention the courts. Making local changes is tough in Missouri, where state law governs much of what counties, cities, and towns can do when it comes to gun reform. Though House Democrats in Missouri want to change that, proposing bills to give Kansas City, St. Louis, and counties the ability to set some of their own rules. They also introduced a new bill to keep guns away from parades by a mile. But they acknowledge their hands are tied by the Republican supermajority.
There isn't a lot we can do when it comes to policy. We can get loud and we can draw attention to this, but it is absolutely about who we send to represent us in the state of Missouri. And absolutely voters need to hold these folks accountable.
And you know, right now, there really aren't many gun restrictions in Missouri. There are no set waiting periods for gun purchases. Anyone 19 and older can carry a concealed firearm without a permit, and minors are allowed to carry guns in public without adult supervision. Let's get to the heart of the matter with KMBC 9's Michael Mahoney, who's been watching this back and forth over gun reform, especially in Jeff City. Now, Republicans did make some concessions after the shooting. They pulled a couple of bills from the agenda. One allowed guns on public transit and in churches. The other one made guns and ammo exempt from sales tax. So they did capitulate a little bit.
Well, a little bit, but Missouri being Missouri, and this being a state that has some of the most lax gun laws in the nation, I don't look for many substantial changes, especially with a supermajority of Republicans in both the House and the Senate in Jefferson City. The House now this past week also passed Blair's Law, which prohibits firing guns in cities, especially after celebrations like the Super Bowl or the 4th of July or something like that. That's been a problem in Kansas City. In fact, the law was proposed after a young Kansas City girl was shot and killed more than 10 years ago.
Right.
That affected her in their area. And so it's taken 10 years to get this. The Blair's Law legislation has been around for quite a while. It just didn't pop up. So that's an indicator of how tough it is.
Right, and it's a completely different situation, too, from what we saw at Union Station.
Oh my goodness, yes.
After the rally. So who knows how long that would take. We mentioned a couple of bills House Democrats are proposing, including a handful of representatives from our area put forth bills shortly after the shooting. Their leadership, though, we just heard from, they don't think these measures are going to get too far. You say there's just going to be a butting of heads this whole time, or they're just going to be dismissed out of hand?
It's going to be, in politics, the very first basic thing you got to do is count the noses. Where do you have your votes? And the votes in Missouri in the legislature are not there for a lot of substantial gun control, and it's just going to be difficult, as Representative Quaid said. They don't have the numbers, and they're going to have to do it through trying to change things at the ballot box or change the dynamics in the politics of the state, and that's going to be turning an ocean liner.
Right, for sure. Do you think maybe an initiative petition to try to do something, though I know Republicans are trying to change the rules on that right now?
It would be difficult to see that happening right now, given everything. There's probably going to be two initiative petitions that may make the ballot, one on sports book, which is quite likely, and then whether or not this effort at relaxing Missouri's abortion restrictions, plus an initiative petition question about initiative petition reform,
right,
might be there. It would be it'd be difficult to see it happening this year.
Yeah, Missouri Governor Mike Parson was in town earlier this past week. Remember, he was at Union Station, had to be rushed away by security after the shooting. And we asked him about gun reform. He proposed opening this up to a larger conversation.
We need to talk about where is all the violent crime happening? Who are the victims of violent crime? You know, who are the people with guns? And, you know, why is it different in some of the bigger urban areas? What's generating that versus other parts of the state? But we ought to analyze all of that.
Now, House Speaker did say at a press conference shortly after shooting, a couple days after, that they were really looking at crime as a whole, not necessarily gun reform. Do you think any change in that regard then?
When you talk about the symptoms of crime, okay, it's not just bad guys with guns or bad guys committing bad things. There are a number of elements into it. Poverty is part of it. Job opportunity is part of it. Housing is part of it for that. And when you're looking at a subject that complex, it is very difficult to see how anything moves forward. And the governor was right in there that, you know, there are lots of moving parts in this. Just putting cops on the street isn't going to do it. Returning local control to Kansas City, Missouri isn't going to do it. There are lots of moving parts on these.
Right, and we'll be talking about many of those moving parts in the days and weeks ahead, to be sure. Michael Mahoney, thank you so much.